What is up, internet? Welcome back to Milehighkei, America's coldest K-car channel. Today what I'm working on is I'm getting some of the parts cleaned up and ready to go for reassembly on the E07A out of the Honda Beat. I have everything all bagged up and I have everything labeled, and as you can see they're extremely oily, so we are going to be reusing these pistons in the new build and just going to be cleaning them up with some carburetor parts cleaner and to get all the oil off of them. We're going to take the rings out, replace all the bearings, and put it all back together. I watched a video recently on how to do this from SB Tuning in Florida, so shouts out to them. I'm going to be soaking the pistons in the parts cleaner for a couple hours because there's a lot of carbon buildup. Want these all nice and clean for reassembly. For those that don't know, I am going to be turbocharging the E07A, and you may be concerned that the pistons and rods might not be up to the task of boosting it. I'm not too concerned about it. I could go with some pistons and rods out of an E07Z. They had a turbo version in Japan, and the architecture of the engine is very similar to the E07A. But with all of the parts that I got for the rebuild already, my budget's getting smaller. I kind of have to just make do with what I have. They are relatively small, but I'm not going for anything too insane with this build, so we're just gonna send it. So there's a couple other things that I have to do to the block and the oil pan to get it ready for rebuild, as well as the turbo. I'm gonna get started on cleaning all of these parts, and then we'll start to get everything put together and ready for final assembly. I'm gonna put you on a time lapse and let's get to it. Not the most exciting time lapse, but it is necessary and it is part of the process. So what we have here, I organized the pistons so I remember which ones they are with these bags. This piston, number 1, number 2, number 3. I'm gonna leave those in there for an hour or two, and then I'll come back and check up on them, and then I'll give them a good scrubbing just to get all that carbon buildup off of there. Now we will go down into the basement. We'll see another step of the process down there about getting the turbo drain set up on the oil pan. So let's get to it.
Later that same evening.
Okay, we're down here in the basement and just wanted to show y'all some of the new goodies that I bought off the internet from Japan for the E07A build. In this box we have new head studs as well as a new set of intake valve springs, and we are going to be putting the intake valve springs on the exhaust side because the intake ones are a little beefier, so we'll get a little more, I don't know the word for it. The valves will be able to close better with these larger intake springs. And then here in this box, 3 new sets of piston rings. We have a cornucopia of little bags here that have the main bearings and the rod end bearings, as well as a new set of thrust washers. And I thought I would just mention this for posterity's sake. Here's the block for the E07A build. So I went ahead and decked the surface with a sharpening stone, and this was the perfect width to go across here. Smooth it out and clean it up so that the head gasket is able to seal properly. I learned this technique by watching Benny's Custom Works. Thanks, Benny. He is a YouTube channel based out of Australia. You might know him as being one of the people that are on Mighty Car Mods all the time. He has a really cool Suzuki Cappuccino, and it is also a 3-cylinder. That's what I use. I use that video to inform my process here. It is nice and clean and ready to put the pistons in. Something I would also like to mention here is that on the side of the block there, that there's 4 C's And those are the bearing codes. They tell you the size that you need for each of the 4 main bearings on the bottoms. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All of mine are C, and I looked it up, and all of those were green. And all of the Honda stuff, all the bearings have like the same thickness codes. I used a caliper to measure the old ones, and I just went and replaced it with the same size. That is exciting. We won't be able to get to this today because I don't have any plastic gauge to measure the oil gap on the crank. So what I'm going to do for now is drill out the hole for the oil drains. I bought this off of eBay, and it is just a screw-in style. So you just drill a big hole, and then these are the O-rings that clamp on either side so it doesn't leak. It doesn't require any welding because I don't have a TIG welder to weld on the aluminum pan. This is on the front part of the oil pan, and the oil pan is slanted because the block sits at an angle in the car to fit underneath the floor. So right here I marked out where I'm going to be drilling the hole for the oil return line. And this, I believe, is a -10 AN line. This should fit right here with no issues. We're gonna see if this works. If we have problems with the turbo draining incorrectly, then we can just fill this hole back up and figure out plan B from there. Alright, so I got the hole drilled for the oil drain in the pan. This stepper bit was the perfect size. It'll seal up a little like that, and there's plenty of room around it. I did run into one problem on the inside, however. So right here, there's a little rib that is part of the structure of the oil pan, and so I'll just have to grind this down a little bit so I can fit the nut in here. So here's the fitting poking through, and if you kind of look from the top where it goes, it will miss this bolt connecting the lower oil pan cover to the actual oil pan. So if I just file down or grind down or get a Dremel and trim that down, we should have no problems. This part of the assembly process is complete. Well, 95% complete after I get that done. Then this just screws on and we're good. Okay, so just making sure that I have enough clearance around here. So this is where the oil filter attaches to, and in the car this kind of faces towards the ground, and then this will stick a little up, and yeah, we have plenty of room to get a fitting on here. It clears the block down below. There's not too much room, but I'm sure that we'll be able to make it work. Okay, so I wanted to double check that I had enough clearance for a fitting to go onto our oil drain bung. So I found this piece of line that has a 10 AN fitting on the end, and this goes to a catch can that I got from my friend. There will be plenty of room to get this on. I was worried that it was going to be too tight and I would have to clearance it from this little piece that is sticking out on the block, but from the looks of it, I think we will have plenty of room, and with the little washer in there that has the O-ring on it, I think that this is not going to be a problem. I am going to have to remake the line to go to the turbo, make it so the oil from the turbo drains properly. so we're back in the garage. The pistons have been sitting in there for a couple hours. I did flip them over and soak the caps in too because there was like a hard line on the rods where you could see that the oil varnish had come off. So I flipped it around just to make it even. And so this is piston 1, and a significant amount of the carbon buildup came off. So that's piston 2. And then you can see that most of the oil varnish off the actual rods themselves came off, and the skirts of the piston look great too. And that one looks really good. I did buy a toothbrush that I'm gonna use to scrub all the remaining carbon buildup off of. I'm soaking the pistons one more time, just for a little bit. I took out the piston rings this time so I can get into those grooves and have those nice and clean. So I'm gonna let those soak for a little bit longer, and then I'll do the final scrub. And then you're supposed to rinse off this cleaner with water. So I'm gonna do that. And then to prevent the parts from drying out, I'm just gonna spray a little bit of WD-40 on them just to keep them all nice and lubricated. So I'm gonna leave this here for a little bit, clean up my mess later, and then we're one step closer to putting them back in the engine.
1 week later.
What is up, internet? We're back down here in the basement, and we are doing some work on the EO7A. I stopped off a couple days ago because I was waiting for some other parts so I can get going on this. Mainly, I was just waiting for a free moment so I could go get some plastic gauge so I can measure the oil clearance on all of the bearings. Everything laid out right here. This is my specs. This is the recommended ring gap for each of the piston rings. This is the torque for the main bearings, the rod bearings, and then here is the oil clearance as well as the torque pattern for the head bolts and girdle or cradle, whatever you want to call it, for the main bearings. So I got that all cleaned up and just gonna get going gapping the rings. And I'm not gonna go into too much detail about it because this is only my second time doing it. If you want to see someone that knows more of what they're doing, Google it. Gonna get started and let's get to it. Okay, so I just got done checking the ring gap and everything seems to be within spec. At this point, I'm going to assemble the pistons with the rings, put them into the block. We'll flip it over. We'll start to figure out the clearance for the main bearings and we'll be good to go. I now have the pistons installed, so now what we're gonna do is flip the block over.
Now, be very careful.
Got the 3 pistons in there, and now I'm gonna clean out the rod ends and then install the new bearings. And then going to put these on, make sure all the clearances are good, and then we can put on the girdle, cradle, whatever you want to call it, and finish install of the bottom end. after a little bit of struggle, I finally got the whole engine back together. I had to take off the girdle or cradle or whatever one more time because I forgot to put in the thrust washers. Took it all apart, made sure everything is good, put the thrust washers in, and now we have a assembled bottom end. So pretty stoked on this. I can't finish final assembly because I do not have a new gasket kit, but this is a big milestone in the E07A rebuild. Pretty excited about it. I'm gonna go get the main crank pulley bolt so I can turn it over a couple times and show that it has compression. But yeah, super stoked. That took me a little bit longer than I thought. It is only my second time assembling an engine, so you have to be patient, be willing to make mistakes, take it apart, and just take your time, and it'll all come together. That's about it. I'm gonna go get that bolt and show you that it has compression. All right, so we're all finished up assembling the bottom end of the E07A, and I just wanted to kind of give y'all a rundown of what all I did, some of the specifications, just for future reference if you are rebuilding your E07A. So these are the main bearing girdle, so all of the journals are in there, and these are 14mm bolts, and their torque spec is 47 Newton meters. And under there, the rod ends have a torque spec of 31.4 Newton meters. I did check the ring gap. All the rings didn't really need to be adjusted at all. And here is the ring gap for all three pistons. So this is the first compression ring, the middle compression ring, and the oil rings, and all those were fine. This was just a factory replacement, so they didn't need to be adjusted. Here you can see some of the residual carbon buildup, which I did a really good job removing. These used to be totally black, so I got rid of a ton of it, and now it looks almost as good as new. That's about it for the bottom end. One more thing that I want to kind of go over before I end this video is the oil drain for the turbo. I got that all installed right here. So this is a -10 fitting, and I do have coming in the mail a 90-degree fitting to come off of here because it gets really close to the oil filter on there. So I just want to make sure everything clears. And I did have to do a little bit of massaging in here. I had to flatten out right here a little bit so this O-ring would seat correctly on here, because you can kind of see it's a little sloped up, so I just had to flatten it out. And then I had to take a little bit out of this little bit of webbing right here. It kind of looked like this before, so that was in the way, and now this is able to seat down nice and tight. So that's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I learned a ton in this video about reassembly, clearances, bearing tolerances, torque specs, all of that. I had to do a lot of hunting to find all of that information because it is not readily available in the US. So I had to go on a bunch of Honda Beat forums and ask people that live in Japan if they know the torque spec. Thank you, Mistbon, on Instagram. He sent me some torque specs that I was able to compare with some others that I got from a Honda Beat forum on Facebook. So thank you so much for all of that. Really appreciate it. I'll put their links in the description below. But again, that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like all this K car stuff. There'll be plenty more in the future because we still have more than half of an engine to put together. We'll be able to cover more of it in the next video. So again, thanks for watching, and remember, keep it small.